Hello, it is the beginning of 2025. I'm back in LA after traveling from the holidays. I don't want to put my Christmas tree up, but I am excited to do all of my wrapped videos. Those are for sure my favorites to make throughout the year, and I've had a hard time keeping up with actually making videos the last couple of months, and so I'm really excited to get into these. And so without further ado, these are my 10 favorite reads of 2024. In 10th place, we're going to go with Turtles All the Way Down by John Green. I spoke about this in one of my vlogs, but I have a soft spot for John Green, as I think a lot of us do that are around my age. I was absolutely the target age and audience for John Green's other YA novels like The Fault in Our Stars and Paper Towns, but I also grew up in the area outside of Indianapolis, which is where he lives now and has kind of become an ambassador for, and several of his books, including Turtles All the Way Down, are set in Indianapolis. And I got this one. I actually went to his book tour with my best friend Katie and got like a signed copy and got to hear him talk about it. And it was so much fun. And that was like for sure in college, like years and years and years ago. And I never got around to reading this one. I think there was like a block in my brain of like, oh, I don't need to like read new YA books anymore and all that kind of stuff, and I just put it off. And this last year, as I was trying to get through my TBR, I finally did this and all the other YA books that I had on my shelf, and I just absolutely fell in love with it, and then felt so silly for trying to act like I didn't need John Green books in my life anymore, because it turns out I can still learn plenty from them. I gave this one 4.5 stars. This is about a young high school girl who struggles with OCD, and it's really just about her senior year as she regains some old friends, as she tries out like a romance for the first time, and really just like her headspace in all of those things. And I just love the way he writes. I love how sincere he is and how quotable he is. I love just the representation of a young girl living around Indianapolis with OCD was incredibly relatable for me. And I sobbed at the end of this book, and here's why. In the moonless darkness, we were just witnesses to the light, and I felt a sliver of what must have driven Davis to astronomy. There was a kind of relief in having your own smallness laid before you, and I realized something Davis must have already known. Spirals grow infinitely small the farther you follow them inward, but they also grow infinitely large the farther you follow them out. And I knew I would remember that feeling underneath the split-up sky, back before the machinery of fate ground us into one thing or another, back when we could still be everything. I thought, lying there, that I might love him for the rest of my life. We did love each other. Maybe we never said it, and maybe love was never something we were in, but it was something I felt. I loved him, and I thought maybe I'll never see him again, and I'll be stuck missing him, and isn't that so terrible? I just love him so much. He's so good. And I'm so happy that I grew up with his books and am continuing to get things out of his books today. The first book that I read of 2025 is actually his essay collection called The Anthropocene Reviewed. And I just felt all of these feelings all over again and am extremely thankful for him. So because of that, Turtles All the Way Down, 10th place. In 9th place, we have The Silent Companions by Laura Purcell. I found this when I was on a hunt for any other haunted house stories, as I have talked a lot about. That is something that I'm finding is like my favorite subgenre of all time. I love everything about it, and I had never heard of this one before. It has an absolutely fabulous cover, but I think I was especially drawn to it just because I never heard anything of it I finally dug into it right after I finished my #1 book of this year, and I really needed another haunted house story. And so I finally picked this up. I would say it was hard for me to get into because it is set, I want to say, in the late 1800s, which isn't necessarily a time period that I feel super comfortable reading. I feel like, especially if it's written in the way that they used to speak, I have a hard time understanding what it's saying. So it took me a minute to get into it. But in the end, I really loved the atmosphere that this book created and the idea that it had behind it. The idea is a story that a woman, after newly getting married, her husband passes away, and she's now in charge of this large estate that she has just come into. And she has servants who she doesn't get along with, that she doesn't know how to speak to. And all of these weird items around the house that, she doesn't feel comfortable because it's not her home, but she's also mourning and respecting the loss of her recently deceased husband. And as always, weird things start happening, and she starts figuring out that this house maybe isn't what meets the eye, and she's figuring out all of these things at the same time. We're flashing back and forth between her present and her past, as well as some of her ancestors' past. And we're putting all of these pieces together as the story goes through. And that was the part that I felt like it did the best, the jumping back and forth at the right time frame, for it really to build all of the tension that it needed for you to have by the end of the book. I did give it 4 stars because I felt like it didn't totally land the plane. I felt like there was a better avenue that it could have gone down. But at the end of the day, I like haunted house stories most for their atmosphere, and this one completely nailed it. And I just want more people to read it. So this is #9, The Silent Companion. I do not yet have my #8 because it's not out in paperback yet. So I read it on my Kindle, and it is The Ministry of Time by Kayleen Bradley. This was my #1 most look forward to release of 2024 because everyone was talking about it, and I heard wonderful thing after wonderful thing after wonderful thing, and I could not wait to get my hands on it. My library hold finally came in on the Libby app, and after I finally really got into the book, I couldn't put it down. The Ministry of Time is based on the idea that we have figured out time travel. There's no question about it. And the government has decided to bring people from the past into our present to see if it is safe for people to time travel. And we are in the head of a young woman who is put in charge of this person that has come through the portal to try to help acclimate him to today's lifestyles and keep track of him and see if it's safe for him to be in our present timeline. Again, I feel like the end of this book didn't totally seal the deal for me, but it has some of the most brilliant observations about the way that our world works and how someone coming from the past would be surprised to see things have changed. And it's incredibly quotable, and you know how important that is to me. And I just absolutely adored the way that it was written and the ideas that were explored throughout the book. This was Kayleen Bradley's debut novel, and I'm so excited to see what she continues to do because this was so promising as a debut novel, and I'm so excited to finally have my hands on it so that I can transfer all of my underlines and everything from my Kindle. Until then, though, I will leave you with this quote. I adored the world in a reducible format. There wasn't a man so special that he might not one day find himself in a footnote or one of my green hanging files. With my hand over the archives, I had control over the system. It didn't matter that it was only the filing system, it was control, and it was what I wanted. In 7th place, another book that I have talked about, I believe in one of my vlogs, is Acts of Desperation by Megan Nolan. This is another book that I had picked up After reading a couple of chapters at a Barnes & Noble and knowing that I really liked the way that she wrote, and just not getting to it, putting it on my shelf and kind of forgetting about it until I started going through my TBR this year. This was so incredibly quotable. I loved everything that she had to say. It was really just like we're in this young woman's head as she's in this tumultuous relationship with an older man, and it's really just her thoughts, her feelings about day-to-day life, and sometimes that style doesn't work for me at all, and sometimes I really, really get along with the way that someone writes. And in the case of Acts of Desperation, I just absolutely loved it so much. At the end of the day, I just like a book about someone having their thoughts about the world. And God, a quote that really knocked me over, which I think I have read to you before. My understanding was that every action would lead me to where I ought to be ultimately, and where I ought to be was in love. Love was the great consolation. It would set ablaze the fields of my life in one go, leaving nothing behind. I thought of it as the great leveler, as a force which would clean me and by its presence make me worthy of it. There was no religion in my life after early childhood, and a great faith in love was what I cultivated instead. Oh, don't you laugh at me for this, for being a woman who says this to you. I hear myself speak. I just love that she talks to her audience, and I just related to so many parts of it, and this was fabulous. Highly recommend if you don't mind a stream of consciousness and a very realistic depiction of a tumultuous relationship. I gave Acts of Desperation 4.25 stars. In sixth place, I have my only non-fiction book in my top 10, which is Bittersweet by Susan Cain. I cannot describe to you how much I love this book and feel like it was made for me. I picked it up after last Christmas, exactly a year ago, when I was in Savannah visiting Sam, and I saw the title Bittersweet. And I have said for years and years and years and years that my favorite feeling in the world is bittersweet. I feel like it lights up my life. It is how I make my decisions. It's the movies that I love. It's the books that I like to read. It's the music that I listen to on repeat. And this is what I read when I picked up the back of this book. Bittersweetness is a tendency to states of longing, poignancy, and sorrow, an acute awareness of passing time, and a curiously piercing joy at the beauty of the world. It recognizes that light and dark, birth and death, bitter and sweet are forever paired. If you've ever wondered why you like sad music, if you find comfort or inspiration in a rainy day, if you react intensely to music, art, nature, and beauty, then you are probably identify with the bittersweet state of mind. This whole nonfiction book is literally just about people who love the bittersweet, who love things that are tragic and beautiful, and she writes it kind of like a novel and in some ways like nonfiction, and she brings in certain art pieces and other people to talk to and interview, and this is my type of nonfiction. I absolutely love this book, and I still maintain that it was partially made for me, which makes sense because Susan Cain's other book is called Quiet, and it's a book about being an introvert, and I have not read it yet, but I have a feeling that Susan and I have a lot in common. So this is number 6, and I believe I gave it 4 stars. In 5th place, my other book that I do not have with me because it is not out in paperback yet is Funny Story. I have never been a romance girly. I have actually tried to read an Emily Henry book before, and it just didn't work for me. But I saw a lot of people reacting to this one and saying that it was one of their favorite books of all time from booktubers and book talkers that I tend to have similar tastes as them. And I also saw a lot of people saying that the main love interest reminded them of Nick Miller from New Girl. And so I decided to give it a try after I found it available at my library one day. And I read it in a sitting. I'm pretty sure I had plans and I like could not get up because I just wanted to finish the book. I absolutely adored it. I loved the main character as well as the love interest, who I did picture as Nick Miller the entire time. And I started to understand also the idea of I don't know, a romance novel that's more about its characters, and the romance comes as a second plot or a subplot to it. And I just really liked the way that the characters were thrown together. And that and my next book got me started on a whole journey of reading a lot of romance books this year and finding a part of that genre that I enjoy. And I'm very happy about, because I had a lot of fun reading this year because of those books that I picked up. So I gave Funny Story by Emily Henry 4.25 stars. In fourth place, and the book that got me totally started on the romance kick, is Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. I really respect the way that this book was written. I didn't want to like it for some reason. I was so against getting into romance, and I don't know why. I think I was picturing like those classic like Harlequin books, and there's so much more to it than that. And I just love the way that she wrote about the main character and all of the things that she was going through, and how that weaved in and out of her romantic relationship with the lead love interest was just so interesting to me. I love the way that Abby Jimenez wrote. I read the other two books in this world right after this as well, and I also picked this up because I saw it available at my library one day after hearing rave reviews about it. And also, it's just a beautiful cover. So this I gave 4.5, I believe. 4.25. I guess I gave that and Funny Story the same thing. But I bumped this one up because this was the one that started it all for me. So I gave this 4.25 stars, and I had a fabulous time reading it, and I do plan on rereading it at some point. We are now to my top 3 of the year. I do have a couple books that I would give honorable mentions. I think especially The Devil All the Time, People We Meet Out on Vacation, The Dead Romantics, The Latinist, Elvis and Me, In the Midnight of Good. What is that book called? Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. But I will talk about all of those books in my all 50 books that I read this year video. So we'll get to those eventually. So these are my top 3 books of 2024. In third place, I have Cult Classic by Sloane Crosley, which I gave 4.75 stars. This is just a Kelsey book. I don't know how else to explain it. I got really into magical realism this year. I have never been a science fiction girl or a fantasy person, but I found that I really like it when it's rooted in reality, and it's just like, oh, we know how to time travel, or this magical thing is happening, but we're not going to question why it's happening, and it's just about like how people are continuing to live life through it. And Cult Classic is very much one of those stories. This is the idea that this woman magically starts interacting with every ex-boyfriend that she has ever had within the course of a week or a month or whatever, and she's given the opportunity to like have these last conversations with each of them, and it helps her reflect on her own life and how these people have changed her. And as always, it's just very quotable and enjoyable. A wonderful example of the quotability of this book. I was a people hoarder. Sometimes I would pull up an old exchange and feel myself fall backward as if through a tunnel, coming out the other end with emotions that were meant to be memories. It was like sticking a pebble in a wound and then getting frustrated the wound wasn't healing faster. It was also falsely communal. As I reread these men's words, which weren't theirs anymore, but artifacts of their former selves. It was not healthy to binge episodes of a sitcom starring my ex-boyfriend's cousin, but I did this like I smoked, with an acknowledgement of each instance as poisonous and yet only the vaguest of acknowledgement that my body was tallying the bill. I absolutely loved this book. My second favorite book of the year, a 5-star for me, is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. This is a book that was recommended to me by both Sam and Katie, who told me time and time again that I needed to read it and that I would love it and be obsessed with it. I bought it a very long time ago at a bookstore with Katie in Colorado and finally picked it up again on my journey through my TBR, and I couldn't get into it and asked them and they said no, stick with it, it's got a slow start, and I'm so very happy that I did. This, again, like all of my other favorite books, is so quotable and just has such a wonderful view on life and such detailed observations that either make you feel like it's a miracle that someone else thinks these same things as you, and feels so relatable, or it makes you think so much and makes you feel like Schwab is highly, highly intelligent, and you're like, wow, I didn't know that anyone had ever thought of this before, and it is something that I will continue to think about for a long time. The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue is about a young woman who asks to be free from people, free to make her own decisions and be her own person. But in return, the gods curse her with she will live forever and she is free to be herself, and she will not be tied down to anyone, but no one will ever remember her. She cannot own things because no one remembers that she was renting the apartment that she lives in. People think she's squatting places even when she's not. She can't have friendships or romantic relationships because they forget her the moment she leaves the room. And it's really this stunningly tragic story about a young woman who is trying to figure out how she can leave any sort of mark on the world, as she will be here for forever, for the rest of humanity, but no one remembers her. And it is just so beautifully written. There are so many quotes that I absolutely loved. And yeah, this is a 5-star book for me. It's giant and I wanted it to go on for forever. So let me find a quote real quick. Okay, I'm really struggling to find one that really like sums up everything. So I'm going to leave you with this very short quote. Who knew the gods were so nostalgic? And last but absolutely not least, my number 1 book of the year, another 5-star, was Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. I had this one. Sam read it, said you need it now. I picked it up. I read it in one sitting and had the most visceral reactions to a book that I have ever had. Piranesi is partially so good because it is impossible to explain. I think it is best to go into it with as little knowledge as possible. What I'll say is that it is a completely genre bender. Oh my god. It is a completely genre bending novel. I loved it most because it does have some haunted house features in it, but it is also deeply rooted in mythology. There's fantasy, there's psychological thrillers, there's action, there's just about everything you could ever dream up is like all in this book at the same time, and is done so masterfully. I know that Sam would agree with me. It was also her favorite book of the year, and I just highly recommend this to anyone. I would never say picking this up that this is something that I would love. It just doesn't seem like it's up my alley. But when you get into it, you realize there's so much more than what anyone can ever advertise for this book. So I highly, highly, highly recommend going into it as blind as possible and just being willing to be along for the ride. For just a little taste, the quote I'll give you is, "I almost forgot to breathe. For a moment, I had an inkling of what it might be like if instead of 2 people in the world, there were thousands." Those were my 10 favorite books of the year. I had a good reading year. I think I had a lot more slumps than I've ever had in the last couple of years, and that was hard to get through, but I feel like I tried a lot of new genres that I've never done before, and I'm proud of myself for trying new things because I found a lot of really great books that I wouldn't have gotten to otherwise. I also, as you know, got through so much of my physical TBR, and I'm very proud of myself for that as well. I still have about 20 left. I've read 1 book of the year so far, but I will see you again soon for all 50 books that I read this last year.